intro it in. I can intro us in.
Yeah, I got to intro last time, and I don't think I did a good job.
Well, we didn't have a name last time. So.
We have a name now. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, no, 100% credit goes to you for that.
Yes.
Yeah, but yeah, this is the second episode of Man Bites Dogma. Mm-hmm. We are just exploring anything that we can explore, as thoughtfully as possible.
Yeah. Things that we subjects that we feel matter to us as Alec and Omeed, individuals that we are, and the last subject that we talked about, I think got a lot of positive feedback. We got some people just being like, oh man, I'm so glad you're talking about this. I'd love to talk to you more about these things. Like I know in your DMs, you're getting a lot of people.
Yeah, my DMs started to really blow up just from people in my circle, that even some that I haven't talked to in years, just like, hey,
reaching out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with that said, it would be nice to continue that trend, talk about the things we like to talk about, but kind of do deep dives as best as we can from our experience and our limited knowledge. Like we're not experts by any means on these things, but we do talk about them a lot. So we're like, let's just record it. And when we have talked about these things before, in the presence of others, we usually get a lot of interest. Even at restaurants, I know like people will turn to us and even start adding their own opinions to it. So we wanted to like bottle this up and put it in a form that more people can interact with it.
Yeah. Broaden that conversation.
Yeah. So this week, or this podcast episode, because we don't know if we're going to do this that
weekly.
Often.
Yeah, we have no idea of what schedule we're doing yet.
I think we're going to try to aim for once a month, if not twice. But yeah, it's so young and so new, we don't know. But that being said, this episode, you want to kind of get into what we're going to explore here?
Yeah, I thought of this topic mainly because 4th of July recently happened, so a lot of people tend to reflect on, Americans anyway, tend to reflect on the concept of America on 4th of July. It's celebrating its independence. And then on top of that, as our last episode kind of showcased a bit, there's a lot of controversy going on right now, not just with, our justice system, but even like, everybody's talking about the pandemic and how America's handling that, how we as a nation are handling that. And I find that a lot of these these conversations that we're having, these controversies, are similar in the sense that like what they're actually, without doing it directly, they're getting at the heart of like these complications, these nuances are caused from something that is unique in the philosophy and value system of America compared to other countries and other nations that have come before it, or that currently exist, for instance. And so, for instance, in reference to the pandemic, since that's one we haven't talked about in detail, a lot of what I'm seeing is, criticism of and justified criticism, mind you, of the contraction rates, the death rates, all of those things, and how people are feeling that this situation is being mishandled by our authorities. And whether you apply that to states or the presidential administration, it kind of doesn't matter. There is this general tenor of disappointment, unrest to some degree of how this is being handled, and they're laying it at the feet of individual people, because that's usually just how our rhetoric goes. But I actually feel like a lot of this particular situation and how it is played out has a lot more to do with the values of our country and how it was formed than anything else. And this is something that, I guess from my perspective, is kind of like, it's one of those few instances where having a lean towards freedom and liberty and the division of power does have some drawbacks. And the question for me that I've been pondering lately is, are those drawbacks worth it? Right? Like, how do we balance this out? Do we want to forego some of these liberties in order to not experience this drawback? Or are we going to consider these acceptable losses?
Right.
And
okay, so just to lay the groundwork. So from my perspective, America was founded on these ideals of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, basically the freedom to pursue your own happiness, whatever that might look like. And those ideals that were supposedly like created for all man, even though that wasn't the case initially. Those ideals basically have caused this trajectory into the present, from that time period to the present, that basically has peppered what our culture is like as an American culture. I know it's a mix of many, many, many individuals and many, many cultures and backgrounds and histories and everything. But one thing that kind of unites us all is that we are all in America, and we have these certain rights that have come from this the founding of the United States, essentially. And those are the freedom to say what you need to say as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, the freedom to practice the religion that you feel is best suited for your needs, the freedom to pursue a business, the freedom to pursue happiness, I guess, is, kind of falls in line with that.
Which, in context of when it was written, was mostly talking about property and land ownership. Like just having things that you own that the government should not be able to take from you.
Right. Yeah. It's because they're coming from a system where, it's a monarchy, where they, everything you do is in service to the monarchy, making sure that is running smoothly as possible. And whatever you say, yeah, exactly. Well, to them,
smoothly.
Whatever you say, if you say something against them, if you don't pay your taxes or anything, I mean, that still holds true.
Yeah, you still got to pay your taxes.
You got to pay your taxes. But I mean, you couldn't say anything against them. It was a different kind of world or government that a lot of people weren't too happy about, because they didn't feel the freedom to be able to express what they wanted to express, to pursue what they wanted to pursue. They were kind of just, you are of the monarchy and you must do these things, and here's a tax that's unjust and you don't get representation or anything. I mean,
even in a prosperous nation at the time like Great Britain, you were still, at the end of the day, in terms of what your legal rights and liberties were, you were a serf. Like, either you were nobility, an aristocrat, or you were a serf. It was serfdom. And so, there was, and obviously when you put a giant ocean between the people and the people that, the populace and the people that govern it becomes harder to maintain serfdom. Yeah. And so these ideas start to arise of like, well, wait, why are we doing this?
Why is this a thing? We have the means to govern ourselves. We have the people. We have the product. Like, that was the main thing that they had.
Yeah.
They had an economy that would sustain a country. Let alone another country from afar. So they felt that they had the. I guess Ashley's home.
Yeah.
I was like, what? Okay. Yeah. They had the impetus, and is that the right word? Impotence? That's not the right word.
Impetus, not impotence. Yeah, no.
America had the impotence, guys.
Some might claim that now.
From impetus to impotence. Wow. We'll hold.
Yep. Just creaky floorboards.
Yeah, wow.
We could start doing. You want to do like a?
It's a rental. Oh.
Yeah.
But basically what I'm getting at is like, that's the kind of the groundwork of what the country, as we know today as America, kind of stems from, in terms of the what we find, what our values are,
right?
That we all share, ideally.
Our mythos
as a country. Right. I'm not saying that everyone agrees or not, but that everyone comes from that background, because it definitely wasn't equal at that start.
But it is undeniable that that mythos permeates every aspect of our discourse, whether or not we realize it or not. Like,
we stem from it too.
Right. Even people that are highly critical and groups that are highly critical of America, or even like any of the economic systems, like what I find interesting is that despite the fact that somebody, for instance, may be a Marxist, which philosophically is somewhat diametrically opposed to a liberated society, a liberal society.
Yeah.
They, like, even when I hear a staunch Marxist make an argument against America, they're making it using values that stem from the American mythos, which I find curious. But
so are you trying to explore the idea of if America, the mythos that it comes from, and the ideals and the values that it talks about, and it kind of exports to everyone, whether those are wrong in and of themselves,
Right.
or can they be maybe not perfected, but like how we value them and how we use them, their tools essentially, how we can use them as tools to create a more perfect union, as I say, or to create a more perfect society, using those so that we can, because we're not perfect as people, but we can use these tools and this kind of groundwork that's given to create a better society, work towards a more equal society, work towards things that work for more people.
Or even if it's worth continuing down this road using this mythos or using these values. Like, because that's the real question that I see being raised is like, we want to change the foundation of what is happening here. And it's like, okay, but you have decided, and I don't know there because nobody's actually talking about this specific subject, hence why I'm bringing it up. But like, what I'm seeing is people are going, without realizing it, they are saying in a lot of cases that they want to chip away at the foundational values that this country was constructed on, which itself is an indictment against those values.
Okay, so that's where you're coming from.
And so it's like, from the American experiment as a whole, do we feel, first of all, has it been successful? Like, that's the first question. Whether we change things about it, we have to determine if it's successful.
Because some people right now are questioning if it's successful, and they're saying we should change it up. So our goal here is to talk through, has it been successful? And to explore what that means. And maybe even come up with an answer from our own limited perspectives. Okay, no, that's fascinating. I like where this is going. So, okay, I just wanted to make sure I was on the same page with you.
And it's good for them too, because I can just start to ramble. It's something me and Hamilton share.
Hamilton now on Disney Plus.
Disney's gonna totally copyright strike this now.
Strike that from the record.
But yeah, so I mean, I can jump into my perspective, but like, I'm more than happy to.
Yeah, I only stopped you just because I wanted to make sure that. I mean, I'm gonna represent people who are just kind of listening to you at this point because I want to hear what your perspective is. But I just wanted to make sure we had that groundwork laid down before you get into it. About what are your thoughts? Because I think you're gonna kind of talk about like movements such as, I mean, I don't even know if it's like one movement in and of itself, but like BLM right now is talking about what you just mentioned about like, let's take down what this means, like what that American ideal is, what is, like, they're just kind of questioning it right now. And a lot of similar groups are talking about that too. So the goal here is to kind of think about, okay, what does that mean? What is this American ideal? And is it working? So I think we just go for it.
Okay. So, and I worded it specifically that way, the American experiment, because I think that that's I guess the most logical, detached way I could probably address it. And it gives me a good framework to think it through. So every experiment scientifically has to have a hypothesis. So the hypothesis, and I think the best indication of a hypothesis that I can find from our mythos, from our history, is the preamble to the Constitution, because the Constitution is really the distillation of these values into specific categories. Like, these amendments all speak to what it means to construct a government and a society off of these ideas of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and the consent of the governed, which was a big portion of it, because that's pretty much your answer to serfdom. And so, the preamble, I don't know if you want, I can be more accurate by pulling it up, but
I mean, if you need to pull it up.
Sure. I'll whip it out real quick. So my phone's over there. So I won't whip it out real quick. Never mind. Strike that from the record.
Someone's going to use that clip against us, by the way. I'll whip it out real quick. Right. Actually, I won't whip it out real quick.
He's flip-floppy. He can't make up his mind.
That's not where I was going, but okay.
I know. But yeah, it's the preamble, and I'm gonna not directly quote it, so forgive me.
Okay, well, how do you feel? What is the essence of the preamble?
Well, it's to form a more perfect union, to provide for justice, and I forget the third one, but essentially, like, I'm pointing directly at the more perfect union. So the idea of this was like to use these values, to use this application and these guidelines and these inalienable rights as they saw them as the foundation to create something that they saw was more perfect. And the thing that I find interesting about that is that that's carefully worded because it's not perfect. They had no disillusion about the fact that, or no delusion rather, that that what they were doing was going to be the best thing that they could possibly exist, right? Which is part of the reason why in the in how they structured the Constitution and the American government and the division of powers, it allotted for things to change. It allotted for things to adapt.
Because they weren't going to get it right the first time, and they did not get it right the first
No.
time. All men are created equal. Hashtag not really.
Which, came through in another amendment to that said Constitution. And what's interesting about that is they were having an argument about that when the Constitution was written, about whether that applied to slavery, and they were split on that. So there were definitely men even back then that were looking at it, and like the groundwork was laid for the 13th Amendment already, because the men that wrote them, especially if you're looking at the Federalist Papers, like Hamilton was actually really big on this. He was very anti-slavery. And so those liberties had to apply. The idea of all men are created equal had to apply to these men as well, to black people, to who they were enslaving at the moment. And so even though we can acknowledge that, for instance, if you're going to take a lot of the criticism, especially the historical criticisms of the BLM right now and them tearing down statues, some of which I'm actually totally fine with. It's more of how we do it. But, because, do we need to have Confederate statues up all over the place? Not necessarily.
No, they lost.
Yeah. That is how history is usually written. So, put them in museums, allow us to remember that these things happened.
Yeah, never forget that it happened,
right,
but don't glorify it.
Correct.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, a lot of those statues were also not put up at the time of the Civil War. Right. They were put up more recently, as an answer to the Civil Rights Movement. I think those can come down. Yeah, no. For sure.
But, it's also just like we have a process for how everything else is done. If you, the other thing that the founding fathers and thinkers of that time period were careful about was they also knew that liberties came with responsibilities, that liberties also came with certain what they would consider to be reasonable restrictions. And so even though if you're going purely off of the value of liberty, right, it makes sense for a group of people who are in the right, let's say in the case of the statues, they're in the right morally, of that these statues should be taken down. Some of them, at least. We can argue about particulars, but the ones that we agree on, they can be taken down. Is that decided simply because a large enough group of people are adamant about it enough to take it down themselves? Is that how you do it? Right? I mean, if you're a truly free, liberated people, the argument is yes. You should be able to take down whatever you want, because that's what liberty means, right?
I mean, yeah, absolute free reign, sure.
Right, yeah. But does that create a more perfect union? Because see, that's the thing where I feel like you have to couple these values with the intent of forming this particular type of government, these sorts of ideals. And so does having absolute liberty actually help perform a more perfect union? And honestly, that was I've been recently re-listening to audiobook versions of the Federalist Papers while I drive. And it's interesting to me that the first 10 essays.
Could you, just before you get into it too much, talk about what those are?
Sure. So the Federalist Papers were a series of essays. I think it's 75. There's a series of essays because when the United States Constitution was first formed by the first Congress, there was a lot of argument about whether or not the Constitution one should be adopted by all of the colonies and states at that point, all of the states, and one of the foundational arguments was whether or not the states themselves should be one union or broken up into multiple confederacies or just be independent states. And so what's interesting about that is like literally the first, like, even though some of the ones that are more often cited have to apply to specific like amendments, and those are really interesting to read. But what I thought was interesting when I was re-listening to these, because it's been some time since I've read them. Sorry, I'm jumping again. The essays themselves, my bad. The essays themselves were written in defense of said Constitution. That's what they were about. So it was a series of essays that were defending the Constitution against its detractors at the time.
Okay.
And making a case for why it needed to, like, why the Constitution needed to be ratified. And so the first, like, 10 are completely focused on whether or not the states should be a union or separate confederacies or whatever. And I think that the arguments laid in for why individual states should be a union are similar, if not almost exactly the same reasons why not allowing complete and absolute liberty to where you want something, you can do it kind of thing applies. And honestly, I feel like most people can agree with that sentiment in general, because it just depends on what example you choose. But the argument in the Federalist Papers for the states being a union and not separate entities is simply that you are more susceptible to both outside and, well, in the case of states, they were the core argument was that it makes you weaker overall to be separated, right? And so from foreign interests, you are a much harder force to bear. But the other argument was that
harder force to bear if you're a union,
right? Yeah. And then the other thing is that if you're separated, if you're different confederacies or just separate states entirely, people are people. Divisions arise, jealousy comes in, spitefulness. Like, to assume that people are always going to be good actors is to be incredibly naive. And so they're almost one of the most compelling arguments in there is that they are more of a danger to each other than any foreign nation would be should they separate, because those divisions will naturally arise. You can't assume that they will stay allies, especially when you're looking at the history of Europe, which they used as part of their case. Like, Europeans all lived together for thousands of years.
And when you're saying individuals, you're talking about individual states.
Right.
Okay, so the states that are bordering each other, one might get a little bit, overzealous and start pushing in and like, no, I'll claim a little bit more of this, more like what we see with countries, essentially.
Right. Essentially,
that could boil down to that at some point in the future.
Right. And so it inevitably fractures what they have fought, so hard to achieve, and will kill it in its infancy, because they will devolve into infighting, and then also that infighting will make them more appealing targets to foreign interest.
Right. So this is a case made for having that federal union, essentially, that oversees the states.
Correct.
States are still separate, but they are separate in a union together.
In an umbrella.
They are together
right.
in the fact that they are all part of one nation, but they are separate in the fact that they are their own unique, I guess, states.
Yeah. And I feel like that's inherent in the argument about individualism. See, individualism, although very incredibly valuable, and I know is one of the things that is focused on in our history when we recount American history, it's a big focus on individualism, because that is something that was unique for America in that time period.
Oh, for the world.
Well, yeah. For the world. Yeah, that's what I meant. Unique for the world.
Yes.
Unique to America, unique for the world. And so I feel like that individualistic mindset, like especially like you go to other countries such as like Japan or even China, like they have a much more communal philosophy.
Yeah.
Like they are a nation first in more cases than they are individuals first.
Right. The individual serves the interests of the entire nation.
Right. And that has its pluses and minuses too. I mean, for sure.
We can talk about that later, but that seems to be a key difference between how the United States has handled the coronavirus versus nations like that.
Yes, and that's exactly why I wanted to talk about this.
For sure.
That comparison.
Yeah. Like, what does that mean?
Right. And so my wonder is some of what we're seeing now in this division, like it's very clear that even from how they were talking about states versus a union, that that argument applies to individual people too, with any government, any community even. You don't have to call it a government. Any community requires some abdication of individualism in order for the community to thrive. Right? And it's about balancing out where those lines are. Like how much of like for me, and this could be just because I was raised with the mythos of America. For me, the equation, the goal is to give up as many individual liberties as you can, or give up as few individual liberties as you can in order to achieve the most communal good. Right? And that seems to be the reverse way of thinking for so many nations in history and so many nations that currently exist. And even, some of the people that, criticize what's happening right now.
Right.
In with the pandemic, with police, with all of those things.
Yeah, they all kind of serve hand in hand together.
Right.
It's all part of that same system and how it's operating.
And so the question is, does leaning on the side of individual liberties form a more perfect union? Because it seems contradictory, right? Right? Like your union the word union implies homogeny of some sort. But individual is by definition exclusionary.
Right. Yes, it is contradictory. Yes.
So why would anybody think that would work? Like that's the interesting, like to me, that is at the core of the American experiment of taking two things that seem contradictory and making them work together. And if I wanted to use a metaphor, it's kind of like how you get water. Oxygen and hydrogen are super reactive elements, but you put them together and you get the least reactive substance that we can find in a lot of cases. So it's like, did we make water? Or did we just pretend we made water?
Yeah, because it's only been a few hundred years now.
Right.
And even though we've exhibited tremendous economic strength and military strength, and we are a world power.
And cultural strength, like, dear God, the cultural
But that's all been in the last, like, the amount and the veracity of it has only been in the last 100 years.
Right.
Maybe a little bit more than that.
Industrial Revolution helped with that.
Sure.
Like,
we became an economic powerhouse, basically towards the revolution. We were always able to produce a ton of capital for other countries and then for ourselves. But so we grew from there. But literally, as a nation, it's only been 200 and some odd years, like as an independent nation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like 2.5, something like that.
Yeah.
And so, another question that one could raise is this enough time to be able to assess it?
True. We don't know. There's a lot of people out there who don't think it's the correct way to go. They point to other systems of government and say we should do it like that. And our government our system has not been kind of around very long, but it has caused a lot of stir in the world.
Oh yeah.
So we are kind of unfortunately in this time period now, and we can't really wait to assess it down the road.
Spotlight's on us.
We might not make it. So.
Right.
So, to debate whether it's the right time to see if it works. The thing is, it is working right now. It is a thing that is happening, and it has been happening for some time. So I think it makes sense to criticize it and to, let's like check around the car and like kick the tires. Let's see if it works. Come on, let's see how it's running.
And I guess for me, the other half of that question is like, if we can agree that we kind of don't have a choice but to try and assess it at this point, just because of how much influence it has over global events.
Right.
Is it the values themselves, or is it our application? Right.
As in terms of what's working,
right,
or what's not working?
Either one.
Okay.
Like,
are the values not up to snuff right now, or is it how we are applying those values not up to snuff?
Right.
Okay.
Because I'll get more specific. Like, let's talk about the pandemic. So
yes, I think that's a good. I think it's a good thing to refer to, because we're all surrounded by it right now, and we can probably apply some of these concepts more easily with examples.
Right. So, in general, like, when people are critical of what is happening, and understandably so, in terms of how America is handling this pandemic and they usually do it in comparison to other countries.
Right.
And there's a lot of metrics that you kind of have to equalize for and yada, 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 because America is very different from most other countries in terms of size, in terms of whatever. But for me, I want to focus solely, for the purposes of this exploration, let's focus on how America operates compared to these other places.
Sure.
Right? So you have a federal government that has some power, but it is very much limited by the fact that the states also have powers, right? And I can say this from the perspective of we both know him, but we have a friend that's very heavily involved in government and military and stuff like that. Like,
yeah,
he knows what he's talking about. And often I've heard him say, like, he's like, honestly, like, federal people can show up, but if the state decides, like, they don't want to have you there or they don't want you to pass, like, there's really nothing we can do. Like, we're told, like, he's like, he literally, like, there's people that have from the federal government, like, in the case of a crisis, they have a special type of clearance that allows them to get past, like, any sort of roadblock or whatever, so they can get to where they need to go.
Right.
And he's like, yeah, they just give us this, but like, if I went to a checkpoint and the cops are just like, yeah, nah, there's nothing I can do. Like, even though
So he's saying, is this from a military standpoint or just anyone in the federal level
anyone in the federal level,
basically part of the executive branch, I imagine?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if I buy that. Like, I know he said that, but I don't know. Because, like, I feel like...
I guess what he's getting at is not that they don't have the right to, but that it's almost impossible to enforce.
The state has the right over their own... Is that
over their own jurisdiction. Yes.
Their own jurisdiction. Okay,
and it's very hard for the federal government to actually enforce the fact that they technically, like, on paper, they can say, I can go through this blockade because I'm a federal whatever and I'm this important. But, like, if they were to deny you, it's functionally impossible for...
I don't know. I can't speak to this too much just because I don't know. But, like, see what right now is what's happening in Seattle, where we have federal police or federal... I don't really know what they are. Federal...
agents.
Sure.
We'll just call them agents.
People who are they're going into Seattle and enforcing some sort of law and order against protesters / what's the word when you're rioters.
Yes, there you go.
Thank you to myself.
Thank you to yourself.
I thought about it. No, but they're going in and from what I've been able to hear, and I'm not in these rooms having these conversations with the state governments, but from what I can be able to hear, the state itself is not welcoming the federal agents into those places. That being said, I don't know what that they're actually doing with, like, they're just saying that out loud and saying, like, just for PC points, like, hey, we don't really want that here. We don't like your kind here, you know, but they're allowing them in either way. But I don't know if I don't know. I understand that's what he's saying.
To counter what you're bringing up, I know, and I think it's Portland, and I could be wrong about this, but I read an article.
Oh, am I saying?
It
might be Portland.
The other day, I read an article about how I think it's the district attorney of Portland, or of that state, I guess, whatever.
That's Oregon.
Yeah, Oregon. Yeah. There we go.
That's not Washington or Seattle.
Yeah,
my bad. They're close.
Is actually going to prosecute those agents. Like, the fact that she, like, clearly.
Okay.
I mean, either it's a political move or, and I haven't looked into the legality of this, but like, if she actually has the ability to prosecute federal agents under state law, then to me that kind of shows you exactly how much power the federal government has over a state. Because, like, yeah, they walked in there and they did this, but, like, if the state decides
I'm wondering,
that they want to go after them for it, like, they have an apparatus with which to do it.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not saying that that's perfect, but either way, in the general handling of all of the pandemic stuff. Sorry, we went off on this tangent.
Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know about that.
And I'm not claiming that I have complete knowledge over that either. I'm just going off of what I've been told from somebody.
What you've heard,
you know, in this world. So, but, you know, it's a situation where the federal government only has so much control over how this is handled, right? Because at the end of the day, the states decide for themselves what sort of mandates
Yes, the states will decide for themselves what they want to do in response to the virus.
Right.
In response to anything, but we'll just stick with the virus for now.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so what I see often, and even what came up in a recent conversation in my household, is because people are concerned, people are worried, this is a crisis, right? Mm-hmm. There is an instinct to, because they want to protect life, they want to protect the health of people and themselves, there is a desire for a more forceful measure to be taken, right?
Yeah, for sure. Especially, yes. In regard to this virus, yes. More people are on board with that idea.
Right.
Yeah.
And the question, and whether or not you want to, argue that Trump has handled this and his administration has handled this perfectly or whatever is kind of irrelevant to the fact that at the end of the day, what you're asking for is more heavy-handed measures to be taken in order to combat this, right? Because the argument that I'm seeing is and it is to some degree a cultural thing as well, and we can get into that. There's a lot of, because of the internet and Twitter and all these things, there's a lot of people in other countries like Germany and whatnot making comments yeah, we don't have an issue with this virus right now because when we were told to wear masks, everybody wore masks.
Yeah.
Right? And what happened in America, in large part due to people's interpretation of American Mythos, is that they went, wearing a mask is an infringement on my liberties. The government can't tell me to do that. Right? And the question is, to me, who is in more alignment with, or is anybody really in more alignment with the actual values in this case? Is it the person arguing for their right to not wear a mask? Or is it the people arguing for in this case, it would be the federal government that you're really asking to do something. The federal government to enact some sort of more stringent mandate, some forceful mandate to make sure that people are doing what needs to be done to keep everyone safe.
Right.
Right. And so to me, it's we're reaching in this instance, which is a very unique instance. This is, I don't know if the founding fathers were considering pandemics when they wrote this, but the question is this one of those things where are we willing to pull back on individual liberty in order to have more communal safety in this case? And what are the implications of that? Or is this just the price that we pay for having liberty?
Right.
And is that a price that we're willing to pay?
So when it comes to the individual's right to question, especially let's just keep with the pandemic, the mask thing where, states can't, or governments, no matter if the state or federal, can't require me to wear a mask because that infringes upon my rights. My personal argument against that is by you not wearing a mask and understanding and knowing the science that we know now and understand now, if you decide to leave your house and go grocery shopping or go anywhere outside where there's other people, and you are not being cognizant of your distance between others or touching the same things they're touching and all that stuff, you are in effect infringing upon their rights to a pursuit of health or happiness because you might inadvertently spread this virus to them. And it's not their fault. Maybe they're wearing a mask. Maybe they're not. I don't know. But because you decided as an individual, I will not do this, you have effectively harmed someone else and stopped them from pursuing their liberty in this country. Now, I understand that, being forced to wear a mask is kind of infringement on your rights, as my body kind of thing. This is I get to choose what I want to do with my body.
Right.
You telling me what I need to do is not okay. But there should be, I guess, some room for like the same thing with free speech. Free speech is free until it gets someone killed or until you're calling for violence.
Right.
There should be that limit as well in terms of your liberty. I think you can apply the same rule where it's like if your liberty can basically cause harm to other people, what you're deciding to do, then that might be the limit that we draw. And is that a federal thing or is that a state thing? That's a good question. I feel like the federal government should be enforcing things that basically will cover the entire country, despite what those states think. But like there are limits to that, and there should be limits to what the federal government can do. But this is one of those things where, in this instance, it's too important to our economy is in shambles or is about to be in shambles because I think the $600 plus up is done this month. So the people who have been able to get by and buy groceries and take care of their families they've been okay for now. And I know this is a different subject. What I'm saying is that because of this pandemic alone, we are about to experience probably one of the worst economic collapses that we've seen in our lifetime.
Yes.
And maybe perhaps in American history. I don't know. I'm not an economist, but just writing on the wall, people don't have work and people can't buy stuff. And that's how our economy runs. Just because the stock market's been doing great the last few months does not mean it's going well as an economy. By not wearing a mask in mass, not one person's fault, but if several people are deciding not to wear masks, and that is one of the most effective things we can do to prevent the spread of this virus and to prevent, the spread of the virus, we are effectively destroying ourselves. We are destroying the health of our communities and our families. We are destroying our economy. We are destroying our nation.
Yeah.
So I think if you draw the line there, it's like, if your liberty is destroying, even if it's not what you mean to do,
right? If
your liberty is going to destroy what this country is and what the world is, there's a line that we need to draw. And it's like, it's tough nuts or whatever you say. I don't know. I don't want to say, well, I could say tough shit. Like, just do it. Wear the mask. It's not that hard. If you can't wear it, like for medical reasons, if that's a thing,
right?
Then practice the other things. Don't go out. Have someone else buy your groceries for you. Do those things. Like, we as a society can ostracize people, socially, and I think we should. The government shouldn't do it necessarily.
Socially, yes. I don't think the government should be in the business of ostracizing people.
We as people should understand as a unit. That this is a very serious threat, and already so many people have been affected by it financially, and I think a lot more are coming.
Right.
So anyway, that's my 10 cents.
And so I'm gonna
2 cents.
10 cents. No,
I know nothing.
I know.
I just want to reiterate, like the last time we spoke, I would say things, and I don't think I preface it with like I really don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, these are my feelings.
Who does?
So.
We're all just talking.
But yeah.
Okay, so let me push back on that a little bit. So I agree with your sentiment. The general idea is sound, but at the end of the day, what you're talking about is curtailing individual liberties for communal benefit. As you see it.
That's the way I see it.
And so the question is now, the thing is what I see is happening is if we're going to do this properly, have this conversation properly as like a country and come to a real conclusion, make real change, it affects nothing about this pandemic currently. Like, it's not going to happen fast enough to actually have actionable things.
Wait. But what do you mean?
Well, the question is, where do you draw the line for that? Because now, let's say in the instance of this pandemic, you just go, you know what? In this case, like, we have decided because, using your logic,
right,
because what you're doing is damaging to other people, and that's where the line should be, right? Now the federal government has license to come in and make a mandate that all states have to follow, right?
In this instance,
yes.
I know what you're getting at.
I know, but that's not how our legal system works.
Yeah,
our legal system doesn't work
use
that
precedent,
way.
Don't
right?
They
use precedent. So you've set a precedent once you do that, right?
Yes.
And now it comes down to the definition. Like, you have to define what a pandemic is, because if you want to keep that restricted.
Yeah.
Any administration can claim that something is a pandemic and then use those powers.
You know they will. You know they will.
Right. These are all things, like, even in the Federalist Papers, they talk about, like, the government will probably try to encroach. So
yeah, they have to prove that it's a unique circumstance, like such as a pandemic. They have to prove that what you're doing as an individual on this level with the mask wearing thing is effective and will prevent or at least help prevent something.
Right.
Now, I guess that gets a little dicey because you can't really prove too well, like, if this number of individuals do this, this will not happen. You can't prove something that hasn't happened yet.
It's almost impossible to prove a negative.
Yes. So, but the thing is, people are dying.
No,
I don't know. Like, I'm not an expert. I can't speak to like the data on this stuff.
Right.
But I don't know how you would write that out in law. I don't know how you can prevent the federal government from using that precedent in the future against the people that it's supposed to be governing. But
and let me I should have prefaced all this with like, this is mostly a thought experiment for me. I wear masks when I go out.
No, Alec is definitely not anti-mask person.
It's more just, it's one thing to say as a society, as a culture, that you should do this. It's an entirely different thing when you say that the government, especially at the federal level, now has the right to mandate something. And so like that's the real concern that comes in, is like, how do we use this? Where do we draw the lines? Because like your same argument, and I know that there is debate about this, especially in like states like California, your same argument could be used for like HIV. Like if you know that you have it and you're not divulging that information and you're not using protective practices and you spread it to somebody else, like that could become easily, if people aren't doing that, that could become a pandemic of all of its own. And so like, does it only apply? Why would it only apply when it's already a pandemic? Why doesn't it apply in preventing pandemics? Arguably, that would make the most sense if you're trying to.
You're gonna make people wear masks all the time.
Yeah, like, and that's kind of, I'm just playing it out.
No,
like,
I can see. I know there's an administration out right now that loves to test the limits of what they can do. And that's not the only administration that's done that.
Nah.
So
I think that's every administration since I've been alive.
That's true. That's true. No, I hear your point. That is it the federal government's role? Like in a dire situation like this, where it is crumbling our nation, in every sense, it feels like the federal government should be able to mandate something like that. It just feels like it should be doing something, but I hear what you're saying, like what stops them from doing something that's not in a dire situation for the nation and making people.
It's the entire purpose of the separation of powers in our government system is to prevent that exact thing from happening.
Right.
And so in this case,
to my knowledge, no state has mandated masks in all places. It's just in public locations. And, yeah.
Right.
I'm just saying that.
And each state does it differently. And
of course, every state has their own rules,
which
for sure.
is part of the issue, really, because states they can't shut down their borders. I mean, I guess they could try, but like states don't shut down their borders really from other states.
They don't,
because otherwise we wouldn't be United States.
Right.
So one state can have really great methods of dealing with this, and then the next door neighbors are just like, do whatever you want, and then you have movement across those lines. And so
whatever that first state did kind of is ineffective anyway, just because you've got people coming in who...
Exactly. So in order, like, if you leave it up to the states, you open yourself up to that problem.
Yeah, which we've been seeing right now.
Right.
I know Maryland was doing a pretty stellar job with their internal stuff, but as soon as states started to reopen and we started to reopen, the numbers started to peak back up a little bit. And, we are... I haven't been down to Virginia. I know you have, but from some of the people that I've talked to, they said Virginia is taking this way less serious than Maryland is. Okay,
yes,
so that's your experience as well. So we're bordering Virginia. That's a pretty big border. I mean, DC's right in the middle there. We got a lot of people traveling between the states,
which is honestly, I feel like the key reason why that's happening is because you have DC in between Maryland and Virginia, and so many people that are in both states move through that corridor.
Yeah. And I know that. Well, never mind. Go ahead.
No. That was my point.
Okay. No, I was just gonna say, like, it's a very populous area, and once they opened back up, people just started moving through there again. And I know PG County, which is kind of around DC, essentially, right? That's the most, I think, still one of the most highly affected areas in Maryland.
Yep.
So, yeah. So okay, that just, you see that happening now. The the fact that there's no limits to your movement between states in this country, which is, a wonderful thing under normal circumstances, can bite you in the ass when it comes to things like this.
And people right now like to lay what's happening squarely on the feet of the federal government and current president. But like, I'm kind of like looking at it. I'm like, I don't know in terms of what the federal government's powers currently are.
Yeah.
I don't know how you could prevent this from that position because of how things are set up. The only way to do that is to give the federal government more power.
Which we don't want to do with this administration.
Well, we shouldn't want to do... It shouldn't matter about the administration.
I guess what I'm saying is this administration is very unpopular.
Right, yeah, no, I get that.
So a lot of people who would want something more... Like, I want more aggressive stuff done on this virus... on this pandemic. Would willingly give more power to that institution, the federal government.
Right.
Whereas otherwise they don't want to.
Right. And that's how I feel like you have to think about it. Like, think about the worst person that you could possibly imagine in that seat of power. And would you want that person to have this ability? That's how I view any sort of legal question about like changing.
That's a good way to view it. I think my personal distaste for the way the federal government has handled this situation kind of is in line with the rhetoric that it's been like, basically
because I haven't heard that before with this administration.
The denial of the denial of data and science, the denial of, until like literally this last week, promoting the usage of wearing masks, not even just like saying this is a mandate, but more just being like, here, no, I'm wearing mine, like, and I'm publicizing that I'm wearing mine. This is the president, by the way, who literally just started wearing masks in public last week. So I think that those are my, just like the complete lack of just empathy and the denial of that there's any problem, really, like we've got the best numbers kind of thing. Like up until literally a few days ago, hearing that kind of rhetoric, and it suddenly changed now that his poll numbers have gone way down. It felt like it wasn't being taken seriously at that level, and it's still kind of not. Now, should that translate into actual mandates that the federal government can like just spread across the whole nation? I think in this instance, I'm still of the mind that we should explore that more deeply, and
I'm not against exploring,
and maybe how we can prevent that from being used in the future. But I know once you set precedent, it's very you've opened yourself up.
Right. It's very hard to take power away from someone once you've given it.
Yes. And the federal government has way more power than it ever had before when it was first started.
Yeah. Or that was originally intended, I feel like, from its inception. I feel like the federal government has more power than was originally intended. And that's a bigger conversation. But like, it's one of these things where, what do we value? Like, do we value there's the classic, I think it's Benjamin Franklin, whoever would, forego their liberty for safety is deserving of neither.
I believe you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look what we've done.
Right. And in these conversations, these criticisms, these calls to action only ever arise when there's a problem. And obviously that makes sense, but like, we don't then circle back around and have this conversation when the problem's over.
Right. Because things are moving just fine.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like we abdicate these things. Like, crap, you could go all the way back to, I say that like it's a long time ago, but you can go back to like 9/11. We handed the federal government a ton of power because we were afraid.
Oh yeah. We're still dealing with it at the, TSA, at the airports and all that. We still willingly do it in the name of security.
Right.
Because who wants to be on a plane when someone is hijacking it?
Or in a building, for that matter.
Or in a building where a plane's coming at it. Like, that's scary stuff.
But we have foregone, like, there's so many things that under the new powers that the federal government was granted during that time period,
they've taken it
so far.
Yeah.
They've been able to invade countries, essentially, and also invade our own privacy.
Other countries, we're still in these wars, like, almost 20 years later.
Right.
What?
After we got them.
Yeah, mission accomplished. Like, no,
quote unquote.
No, that's ridiculous. That's a completely different can of worms.
But it's endemic of what I'm talking about.
You're getting into military industrial complex,
right.
but like these are, I don't know. This is just We pay for all that stuff, man.
and that is kind of my point, is no matter what we do, we pay for it, and we have to understand what we're paying for. Right? So either...
No, they're taking our money and
Right.
fighting these endless wars and taking away your privacy, and...
But we let them because we're scared.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the whole idea.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're scared right now. And the question is do we let them? Is it worth it in the end?
Right.
And I'm going to sound callous here, but again, this is a thought experiment. I am not unempathetic to the plight of other people.
Of course.
But like the numbers that you're talking about in terms of death, like the question boils down to on some level is the thousands of people that have already died and probably will die from this pandemic. How many people are we willing to let die in order to maintain these liberties? What's the equation? Because that's what it boils down. I mean, these liberties were bought with blood.
Yeah.
So clearly we were, like, at some point, people that came before us thought that it was worth men's lives to attain these things. So how many lives are worth to maintain it? Mm-hmm. And that's a very grim way of phrasing it.
It's a terrible way to look at it. I mean, it is essentially one way that you look at it.
Right.
That you probably have to look at it if
Because
you wanted
nothing
to
is
pursue this. Yeah.
Nothing worth doing, nothing majorly
If you wanted
accomplished.
to maintain the system,
Right.
that is a way to look at it that you kind of you can't neglect, I guess.
Right.
And I'm not equipped to answer that question.
Well,
I don't think you are either.
No, I'm not claiming that I am.
No, I know you're not. Yeah, it's I hear what you're laying out, man. I guess my just getting back to the federal government in terms of this, what their response has been. My biggest thing has just been the rhetoric and their language, and the denial of what's happening almost. And I think if they took it more seriously and supported, like, I know the federal dollars go to finding a cure or finding vaccines and stuff like that, and I know that they're pouring a lot into that stuff. I think there's something to be said, and this is a separate issue, but there's something to be said for being a good orator and making people feel like they're in good hands. Like we spend all this money, we give all these taxes, we are part of this union, and dude's just not helping out at all. Like
Right.
he's in terms of like I can't look to this guy and feel comforted by, okay, they've got the handle on this. They know what they're doing in terms of, they're taking this seriously, and that's all I want to hear.
Right.
Even if they're doing the same thing they're doing, like on action level right now, if they're doing the same
literally
thing,
nothing could change, but as long as you felt more confident about it, it'd
I
be
am
okay.
I am admitting that. I feel like they just didn't take it seriously. They were just always saying, it's not as bad, it's not that bad, it's not that bad, it's not bad.
Right.
And then as soon as the poll numbers go down,
Well,
as soon as Biden in his basement is doing much better than you, oh, maybe I'll wear a mask. That's my best impression, by the way.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
No, I totally understand that that's a dumb thing to think, but like, just
No, nobody has felt secure.
no one's felt secure.
And I feel like there was pluses and minuses to that, frankly. Nobody has felt secure ever since he took office. And I think that there is both a positive and a negative to that.
Yeah. The secure aspect in terms of the pandemic is important.
Right. But you also have to, like, and this was the source of contention in the conversation, this particular conversation that I had earlier today, I was like, well, in order to make people feel secure on some level, that means that you are willing to be lied to.
Yeah.
Right. Because
Yeah, I hear you.
like that's what it necessitates. I'm like, and I use the example, not that I'm trying to be insulting to the American public, but like, it's kind of like when you're dealing with children and complicated issues. Like, you'll
omit some stuff.
every bit of it because
You don't want them to overreact.
right.
Yeah. It's not helpful.
It's not helpful.
Yeah.
So like, if you want to feel secure, then you are accepting of a government, of entities that are willing to at least withhold certain information from you.
Yeah.
And do we want that? Because I feel like the natural instinct for a lot of people is like, well, no, I want the truth, but do you?
Can you handle the truth?
Can you? Damn it.
Well, it's true.
I know,
Can
yeah.
you handle the truth? I don't know. you know what? If I don't know if you have one or the other. I think you can tell the truth, but you can also
that's why we have classified documents.
No, okay, truth. Okay, I'm going to talk about the pandemic.
Sure.
You can talk about the truth in relation to the pandemic. Understand that it's happening. Understand like the gravity of it, and radiate that as well. Like, take it seriously. Be like, look, the best thing we can do as individuals, social distance. Wear a mask when you can't do it, or wear a mask when you're out in public in general. Wash your hands. All the great stuff that we can do on an individual level. Just keep saying that to people and to understand, like, hey, we have to sacrifice. We have to do a lot of sacrificing right now. I mean, a couple generations past had to do the same thing for World War II.
Yep.
They sacrificed a lot more. And honestly, yes. I would rather deal with a pandemic than deal with the Nazis and Japan.
Yeah.
And the sacrifices that Americans made back then were incredible. Not only the human sacrifice that we had to endure, but like just financial, like everything. Everyone at home had to make sure, like, they just pared down what they ate, pared down everything. We're not really being asked to do that. All we're being asked to do is a few little things to make sure that we don't spread this virus unnecessarily. And I think the federal government has a huge role to play in doing that. They're not forced. Maybe they don't force it in terms of that, but maybe they do take it seriously and be truthful about how serious this thing is. Don't shy away from the truth on that. Don't try to win over people and saying, it's a Democratic hoax, like stuff like that. But be truthful about it, but also display confidence, and not in like blind confidence, but confidence like, we can beat this thing if we work together. We can beat this thing if we do these things. I'm asking you to do this, and we're going to do this. And I'm talking to all the governors at all the states. I'm talking to the Congress people who represent you. I'm talking to the Senate. We are all in line. We want everyone to be good. But instead, we're not hearing that. And I know this is my complaint against this specific administration and this specific federal government right now. But I think that's how you would handle that. Because I like what you're saying about the mandate. I don't like what you're saying, but like, I understand what you're saying about the mandate idea. If a federal government mandates something and we allow it to go through, what else are we saying yes to in the future? Right. I understand that we've already opened ourselves up to a lot of things in our past, especially after 9/11, in our lifetime. So you're about to make a point.
Yes.
And I cut you off.
No, that's fine. No, you should finish your point. However, even what you're talking about still leaves the door open for the exact same protests against wearing masks, the exact same arguments of it's an infringement of my liberties. Right. I don't have to.
Okay.
Right. And so does it, like...
community ostracization.
Which will naturally happen.
Yes.
But, like, that's not a conversation to have...
shame.
...through the government.
Yeah.
That's not a political conversation at that point.
I agree. If the government isn't mandating masks and we don't allow them to do that to I don't know, we don't give them that extra thing above us to hold over our heads, it is up to society to shame people into submission, I guess, for better or worse.
Right.
And I know we see that a lot. I'm sure you're online. You're seeing all these videos of these anti-maskers being berated.
Right.
It is a business's right to...
And the other way, too. Anti-maskers berating other people.
Of course, yeah.
Right.
But it is a business's right. Like, someone who's an anti-masker and they're going to, like, a Costco and they're yelling at people. Right. And, like, it's like, hey, it's Costco's absolute right to deny you service if you're not going to put up with it. It's also, in a lot of states, I know in Maryland, it's a state order. So it's like not even even if the company wanted you in their place, they're legally not allowed to let you in.
Right.
That's a separate issue, I know.
Which is actually, but it is, but it isn't. Because in a different country with different values, that company actually doesn't have that liberty.
To allow you or not allow you?
Correct.
Yeah.
And, like, that's something that is also unique to that
It's up to the government.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the government can go, business, you have to do this.
Yeah, it was big news the other day when I think Walmart had said all its Walmarts and Sam's Clubs and all that are going to, across the United States proper, going to enforce the mask rule if you come into their stores. I know that was kind of big news.
And so the question is it us? Like, that's kind of where what I'm really trying to get at when it comes to, like, these criticisms of the government and how our government functions. Because as much as there is individual liberties for one person to be horrible or not follow any sort of suggestion or not be safe, there are also the liberty of other people to operate in such a way that they can ostracize those people, that they can decide, I don't, and where those lines are drawn, people argue about too, because then you have the argument of, does a business have the right to deny? So like, does the cake maker have the right to not do a homosexual wedding? Like, whatever. But like,
yeah,
that is also, liberty can be a counterbalance to liberty, is kind of what I'm getting at.
I hear you.
And so, it's one of these things where how is the problem how we are functioning, how we are intended to function, the ideals put forward, the mythos. Is that the problem? Or is it the fact that we have gotten into this scenario where we have, in my opinion, abdicated ourselves from our own responsibility as free people? Because we want the government to go, do this, mandate this, or show this sort of confidence. We
literally talked about this last time.
Right.
Like, yeah, giving away more of our freedoms so that we can say, I think I said daddy government.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. And so it's like, I feel like we keep, every year that goes by, we lean further in that direction where we want the government to handle things
that we probably shouldn't be.
We can handle ourselves. Because it's like, if we don't want to be around somebody that doesn't wear a mask, and even if there are outliers or minorities that don't want to wear masks, right? If most of us agree, like, hey, we don't know, well, none of us are really scientists, we don't really know whether or not this actually does anything, but wearing it is definitely, like, if it does something, that'll protect us, and if it doesn't do something, it doesn't hurt us either.
It's
so like,
the
whatever.
least you could do.
Right.
Like, if it wasn't real, what have you lost?
Nothing.
If it is real, you've gained so much.
Right.
Like, there's no...
And most people can make that equation.
Most people do.
Right, most people do.
Yes.
And so if you stop looking to government authority to ensure that other people do this, and you just simply go, I am going to use my own liberties, freedom of association, whether you're an individual person or a business or whatever, and go, okay, I'm not going to, in this instance, associate with somebody who is not wearing a mask. The problem, like, even though they're not doing it, in terms of public health, the problem takes care of itself because nobody's near them.
Well, maybe.
I mean, they're near each other, in which case they can get each other sick. But like
the speed of I don't know, like, because I know it was bungled a little bit in the beginning where we were told, like, masks don't really do anything, they're not effective, don't worry about wearing a mask, just,
and that was coming from the scientists.
Home. Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Surgeon General and Dr. Fauci, I know, said those things. And Dr. Fauci has since said that was a mistake, and that they, I don't know, but since then, so, like, what I'm saying is, I guess there is some responsibility on the federal government to give us that information and to allow us to make choices that are sound and well thought out and knowledgeable choices, I guess. But yeah, with this pandemic thing, the thing is, it's just, it could have been a lot worse, and we didn't know what it was. I mean, it's still not great. It's really bad, but it could have, we didn't, at the beginning, we thought a lot of people in our lives were going to die.
Right.
And the speed of which this virus can move and the speed that, we can adapt to the mask wearing rule and all that are very different. And I think the speed of the virus, like, I think in something as dire as that, I still think that there should be some, and I don't know how to implement it.
Right.
I just think that the government should be able to take that knowledge, take it seriously, and mandate something that just, look, we need to do this. This will make sure that we are all safe, and we are not hurting each other, and that we are not hurting our nation and our economy and all that stuff. I know it gets back to the things we talked about, but there's something so dire like this where potentially half of our nation could have dropped dead. I don't know. We didn't know.
Right.
Like, that's something for me that calls to be as dire an action to take on that level. I don't agree that it should be taken for literally anything else. And I know that states have autonomy But I think in situations like this, it's just incredibly different. And it's not like, I don't know.
It's a hard balance.
It's a hard balance.
Right?
Yeah. It's just the virus turned out to be the way it is right now, and it's not great. But we didn't know it was going to be like that. We thought it was going to be worse.
And also, just as a caveat here, because I know people that live in other countries and have been talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
Not every country is accurately reporting their numbers either. So,
well, not every state's doing it. Not every country's doing it.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, a lot of these comparisons to like, oh, these other countries are handling it perfectly. It's like,
they're not handling it perfectly. No, I'm not saying that. Yeah. I'm not arguing for that either. I'm more arguing that they. And maybe I don't know, but it appears that they're taking it more seriously.
Right.
On a federal level, or I guess a national level, correct. I should say.
Correct.
So,
but
that's probably all I'll say about that.
Yeah. And so I guess like this is obviously one aspect of talking about.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Right. Of talking about the subject of like, the American experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Do these values work? Do we like them? Do we think that we need to adapt them, change them, whatever?
Right.
And so, the thing is back to the hypothesis. Is this more perfect?
Mm-hmm.
Do we feel like, and I know this is this is kind of a loaded time to ask that question, but like, does it feel more perfect
mm-hmm.
than what we have seen, what we see before? Like what we're seeing in other places? Like, because the other extreme, like I would say to some degree, the American values lean on the extreme, comparatively lean on the extreme ends of liberty, right?
Sure.
They're kind of like
compared to other countries.
Yeah. And if you want to take for example, like China, it's on the opposite end of that.
Right.
And what is interesting is like we don't get accurate numbers. Nobody's going to get accurate anything out of China for
mm-hmm.
that reason.
Yeah.
Like, but do we want it handled like that?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I'm speaking in extremes, and we can come to the middle at a certain point. But do we want it handled like that? I don't
mm-hmm.
think we do. Mm-hmm. I think anybody can look at what.
No, we don't want it handled like that.
Right. And so,
brute force,
and not being able to watch Winnie the Pooh, like nobody wants that.
Basically, in every level of your life is being controlled and dictated by government. Yeah, no, we don't want that in this country.
But that didn't happen all at once for China.
Mm.
That wasn't all at once.
Mm-hmm.
That happened in degrees,
mm-hmm.
little by little.
I don't know enough about the history of China to agree with you.
I mean, they were already, to be fair, China already started as a more communal society, like they always have been.
Right.
But with the introduction of communism, like it was kind of a natural fit. But even though it was a more natural fit to that culture, it's not like the government just immediately took these powers, right?
Are you talking about when communism took hold?
Mm-hmm.
So the government didn't. I thought that was like just how communism was. Is like government kind of controls the means of productions and. Controls all industry.
But how you get to that point, what I'm saying is how you get to that point.
How you got to communism.
How you got to that point of complete control.
Once communism took over, it was that way.
Right.
Okay,
I
misheard you.
Yeah, like basically what I'm saying is like a lot of people view it historically, even with Russia, for instance, like people view it from this perspective of it wasn't communist and now it's communist and has all this control. And it's like, no. It started taking control piece by piece before it got to communism.
Okay.
Communism was just kind of like the obvious stroke. Like that was the when it became apparent to everyone else that is what happened. Same thing with Germany. Germany didn't take those powers, in Nazi Germany didn't take those powers all at once. It was getting you to agree to just a little thing and like no, I think in this case, like for safety I can give this up, or that makes sense, I can give this up. And they just keep slowly pushing that line. And what I am fearful of, because I personally, I don't know if anybody's caught on yet, I definitely am more of an individualist than I am.
No way.
And yeah, again, that's probably due to my history with a cult, because that is the antithesis of individualism.
Yeah.
I'm an individualist at heart. And so I see not just the pandemic, I've seen this in my opinion, every year we have certain conversations that I've noticed people not realizing that they're just inching more and more. They're like, let's have the government take care of this. And you know what? I don't think people should have the right to do that. And like we have certain moments where, the sides get switched where it's like, for instance, in terms of personal liberty, like you have abortion rights, that argument. And like that's a very complicated one too.
Very complicated.
Because it's like, the liberty versus the woman who is pregnant versus the liberty, like life is one of the protections. Like, and how you define life matters in this conversation. But,
right.
These questions don't get asked in a nation that does not value liberty. Like that conversation isn't a conversation. That's the powers that be think that this is how it should be done. Right? And the question is that is technically more efficient. You can respond to problems a lot faster.
Yes.
When you do it that way.
True. You could.
You could. You have a greater potential to do that.
You have a greater
yes,
potential.
But
sure.
you also have a greater potential to cause harm. And so, like, to your own populace.
Yes.
Because you can act with impunity. And the question is, have we shown that despite the fact that it requires sacrifices, despite the fact that it kind of allows you, it necessitates that you allow people to be harmful to themselves and maybe indirectly to other people. Like, is that a more perfect way of doing things? Is it more, and like by what metric do you do that? Because, arguably in a very short amount of time, America became a global powerhouse.
Yes.
Like, and it's definitely in terms of economics, like incredibly powerful still to this day. Innovation is super high. Like there's a lot of things that when you allow freedom of individuals, like people show their potential.
Yes. Yeah. That's proven time and time again in this country for sure.
And so, and that to me, I think that's why even to this day, like, even though there's conversations about that too, like immigration is super high here because people see that. They see that, like, they feel like I have potential and I'm not able to tap into it where I am. And I'm free to test my mettle and improve my potential in this arena. And, if we push too far because we're afraid in these instances, we eventually unmake the values of America, and we start to lose those things too.
Right.
At a certain point. And so, is it better to have these things as sacrifices in order to maintain that, or to maintain it in its current form? Or are we, like, how much do we move the needle is kind of the question. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm concerned on both ends. Like I'm of two minds about it, because obviously I'm somebody that walks around and wears a mask. I think that, part of, and maybe that's part of the conversation, is like I feel like the price of my freedom, my liberties as an American, is that I act responsibly with those rights in regards to myself, in regards to other people. Like I feel like, and I think that this is true in its founding, I feel like I have a duty to do that. Otherwise, I have not earned those rights. And I don't know if that part is taught. I don't know if that part, I feel like that part has been lost in our culture of like, you have a duty. Like, I feel like we have, like, ironically enough, I think we have gone so far individualistic that we forget that we have a duty to other people. And so, like, if you were, instead of, and because now that we've reached that point where we forgot that we have a duty to other people, the only way that we can conceive of getting other people to do what we want, or what is smart, or what is reasonable, is to have the government step in and force them. And I think that's, to me, that's the crux of the problem, is that people are not coupling rights with responsibilities in their heads. Because somebody that's taking their rights seriously would act that way. Just like you're talking about a government that takes this problem seriously would act in a certain way.
Right.
to me, it's like, even though we need a government for certain things, the idea that we need a government to we need the government to give us accurate information as much as they can, right? But beyond that, if you're acting responsibly with your liberties, I don't need a government to tell me to do it or force me to do it.
Force it, yeah.
Right. They go, this is smart. This will help protect people. And I go, okay. I don't want to not protect people. I don't want to like destabilize the community that I live in because I have the right to.
Right. Yeah. So you're laying it all at the feet of the individual, essentially.
Yeah.
Not all of it, but maybe 90% of it.
Yes. I feel like a good portion of this could be solved by people exercising individual responsibility as well as having individual rights and liberties. And I don't think that I know for me, like when we talked about rights in school in history class, no one really talked about that side of it. That rights do in fact come with responsibilities. It took me doing my own research and looking into Supreme Court cases, like the draft, for instance. There is as much as there is a lot of like, even in our history, there's a lot of argument about the draft. I'm actually somebody who isn't necessarily anti-draft. I think the argument for the draft is actually somewhat sound.
I would agree. A lot of people don't like my opinion about the draft.
Yeah.
Where I think as an American populace, we would take the wars that we enter into a lot more seriously and know what's actually going on in the world. And in regards to American foreign policy, if we had a draft instituted, because more of our brothers and sisters here would actually be affected, and therefore we would be affected, and therefore we would actually care about what the federal government decides to do with our own people. And so we'd have a stake all of a sudden. Whereas right now, we don't know who's out there. We know a few people maybe in our lives, but we don't really have a stake in what's going on. And honestly, at the end of the day, the American public just doesn't care what's happening in Afghanistan or Iraq or anywhere, Libya. And I think if they instituted a draft,
well, technically, I think I don't think they got rid of it completely. I think it's still
the draft.
There. Yeah, they just haven't used it.
Selective service is around, but they haven't. Yeah, they haven't called it up.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. Technically, it's still around for the boys out there.
For the boys.
Yeah. Women don't have to. Oh, maybe they do now. Maybe they have to sign up now.
I don't. I'd have to double check that.
When I signed up to vote, when you are of age, you as a boy, you have to sign up for the selective service.
Correct.
But I don't know if that's changed since then. I want to say maybe, which doesn't really answer the question. But despite that, I agree with you. I think the draft is. It wouldn't be great to be called up for something.
Of course not.
But at least it would give us, as society, part of the society, people in this society, the knowledge of what's going on in the world. It kind of forces your hand essentially to do that homework and to understand what are we doing as a nation. Are we good with this? Is this cool? Like, are we really gonna go to Vietnam, and why are we there? Like all that stuff. Like, and even then, when we had the draft, I mean, you could argue against it and being like these men had to go out there against their will, essentially. And like several years into it, everyone knew it was an unjust situation that we were involved with. And like, why are we there? Why are we there? And all these protests were happening. And it's just like, they just kept pushing. They didn't know how to get out. Gotta save face. We're America. We're awesome. We can't do it like this.
Yes.
You did us dirty, But anyway, I'm sorry. I just went on a rant.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's kind of what the forum of a podcast is for.
Right. That's my opinion on the draft.
Like, and I think that's interesting because we agree for different reasons. Because you take a pragmatic approach to why the draft is a good idea, and I actually take more of a philosophical approach.
Lay it on me.
The reason I think the draft is justified is because of the relationship between liberties and responsibilities. So I think that fundamentally, if you are going to, like, everything, as we know, everything in life has a price.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, even though these rights are, as our founding fathers called them, inalienable, God-given, is more or less what they said, they still have to be paid for, because the only way that you have those rights is through being an American. If you're a British citizen, you still don't get those rights, right? And so your relationship with those rights is directly tied to the existence of America, right? And so the price that you pay for having those rights is to, when it is necessary, be called to defend a nation that actually defends those rights. Like, it's a symbiotic relationship between you and the government.
Sure.
And so, like, that's why I think that the draft isn't necessary. Like, obviously, it shouldn't be abused, but, like, I think the draft has validity because of that.
It's a duty to the nation to defend it, essentially, when it needs to defending.
Because if you're not willing to defend it, I feel like you don't deserve the rights. Right? If you're not willing to defend your rights, then do you deserve them?
If you're not willing to defend the apparatus that preserves your rights, then maybe you aren't entitled to them.
Correct.
I hear that. I do hear that. Yeah.
But I've never actually heard your argument about the draft, and I find that interesting. Like, pragmatically, you're right. It does.
I just think more people would care about where we send our boys and girls.
I mean, I have that same thought about taxes. I feel like taking taxes out of people's paychecks before they get them is a terrible idea, because if you actually like calculate out of your paycheck how much of your taxes actually
you might have some questions.
You would have some questions. Yes.
Yeah. Hey, that's a good point too. Yeah. No, I think because we pay. I mean, in terms of the Western world, we don't pay. At least in our income bracket, we don't pay a lot in taxes. We do pay a decent amount, but we don't pay as much as other countries tend to because of just how they're set up. And but even so, the money that I see, where I see it going, I'm just like, my money? I don't want it to be used for that.
Right.
And I think if more people thought in those terms, like these wars, for instance, like how many years, how many contractors are we paying? Why?
What's the goal?
What's the goal? Are we just protecting poppy seeds for the heroin and all that? Or are we protecting the oil stuff?
Are we just sticking it to Russia?
And then I still got to pay this money at the pump? Like, what? Like, if we're doing that, like, can I at least get some of that back? Like, I don't know. There's not really an outcry for like, hey, what's going on, guys? Like, what are you doing with all our money? You know, because the government isn't a business. It doesn't produce product to sell goods and services around the world. It takes money from its people to be able to carry out its business. Not business, but you know what I mean. Carry out what it's doing, its activities.
Right.
And that money is generated by us. That money is generated by us.
Yes.
So if we're paying for those things, I'd like to know where that's going, and I'd like to have a say in that. And we do have a say, but in terms of like our vote and what we do, what we're advocating for as a nation, as a people. But despite that, anyway. Yeah. So I think, do you have anything else you want to get into?
It's more of a kind of answering the question, because right now I've been positing angles of which you can look at it and trying to play both sides and talking about these issues. And the reality is do we think, and we can have different answers on this, but like, do we think personally that these values, this system that we have set up, or not we, but that has been set up, is it more perfect than what we can see currently in terms of how nations are run, in terms of how cultures are formed? Right?
Right.
Is it more perfect? Is the question.
Are you asking me? My thoughts?
Yeah.
I think we have a system here that is incredible. The way it's set up and the way that it is basically malleable to fit the needs of as society continues to advance and grow. And I think that alone allows it to be very useful to us even today. I don't think it's perfect or more perfect right now. I think it could use another look, and maybe all of us together as a nation can kind of tinker with it a little bit, making sure that it's kind of up to date in terms of some of these things that we've been talking about today, especially when it comes to corruption in government and how easy it is to, be swayed by corporate entities and things like that. and not the will of the people. It's more the will of who has the money.
Right.
I think there's some things to look at there, because I think it is not serving the best interests of the people at this point,
Right.
As well as it should be and could be. But it does still maintain the individual as the height. Like, you can do what you need to do as an individual, as long as it's not hurting anybody, as long as you're not inciting violence. And I think that's very important. I don't see us giving that up. And I don't see a reason to give that up. But I'm not against kind of looking into the system and maybe checking out and seeing what's updated.
Yes.
But I think the system allows for that, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
Like, I think it's a good system.
It's set up to do
the
that.
system itself is pretty good. Where we're at right now with it, I think can be updated and adjusted heavily.
So, by comparison, since you said it wasn't more perfect, I'm curious, comparatively, what would you put it on equal footing with in terms of how other systems?
What do you mean more perfect?
Because the way, maybe I should have clarified this.
So the system itself I think the system itself is a good system.
Right.
I don't know if it's equal to any other system or lesser than any other system.
Because I guess the way I was interpreting it, I can clarify, the way I was interpreting it was that their usage of the term more perfect is a comparative statement.
Okay.
It is compared
more
to...
perfect than others.
More perfect than others, more perfect specifically to Great Britain.
Sure.
Right, of the time period.
Right.
And so when I was saying more perfect, I was saying comparatively to other systems that are currently in place.
I'm not well versed in other systems at this point.
That's fair.
So I don't know what it's like to live in Great Britain currently. I have an idea of what it might be like to live in China or Russia. I don't know, but I have an idea. And other places around the world, I have an idea. I've been to England and I've been to some other countries in Europe and Canada, but I haven't really explored beyond that. So I don't know. I don't know if it's more perfect. I think they have things that we don't have that I think I would like to see here, but I don't know. First Amendment, for instance, is not something that you see pretty much anywhere else in the world. And I think should be heavily defended. I mean, it's the reason why we wanted to start talking about stuff.
Right.
And it's not the reason, but it allows us to be able to talk about these things.
It is the apparatus through which we are able to feel free to do what we're doing.
I think the United States has probably the best system. I just think it's been abused and been neglected.
Oh, that's no argument.
That's kind of where
me.
I am.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know other systems well enough. I'm also biased because I'm from here.
Correct.
And this is basically all I know.
All of it's a loaded question.
My father is Iranian. He escaped the Iranian Revolution in the 70s, the mid 70s, and he came to this country right at its bicentennial. He always wanted to live in this country, and he's prospered since coming here. He was about to go to jail in Iran for speaking out against the government, speaking out against the religion that took over there, or the religious apparatus that's over there, not necessarily the religion itself. And so he knows, and I've grew up with him. He knows firsthand what it's like to not have First Amendment or the right to speak out your mind without repercussions. So I grew up with that. So again, I don't know every other country in the world, all their systems, but I do understand that the United States is a very special place in terms of that system. And it's maybe not as unique as it once was, but it was revolutionary.
I see what you did.
Yeah. So that's what I would say. I don't know what's more perfect than this system.
Right.
It needs work. It needs help.
Right.
It needs people who are smart and who have ideas as to how to make it better. And we need to listen to them and understand that you're coming from a different place. Let's figure this out together. Let's work together to make it better. Because that's what it's designed for. I think it's designed to be better. Can it be changed easily? With these people in power? I don't think so. But it's not like we can't work towards it.
Right. No, of course.
Okay.
How would you, and you don't have to go into full-fledged detail. I'm just more curious. How would you make it more perfect?
More perfect?
Yeah.
Yeah, so not my area of expertise, but I mentioned before corruption's a big deal. In terms of basically if you have money in this country,
you have much more influence
you have
than
power.
somebody who doesn't. Yeah.
You have power over how the country is run, and what is a priority for our lovely men and women in Congress and the Senate and all that. And they are more likely to take on issues and pass bills that will help out people who, fill their pockets with money.
Right.
And not the people who are there in the constituency, who don't have those resources, don't have those powers, and are hurting and suffering right now. I don't know what that would look like in terms of policy or how you would. I'm sure there's many little things that you can do to tweak the system, like whether it's campaign donations or contributions, looking into that area, looking into the lobbying industry and seeing what can be done there, looking into how the military budget is spent and how, like, I understand, we probably need contractors for certain things, but how are those contracts doled out?
Right.
Like the no bid stuff and all that sort of thing. Just basically handing, the government has turned into this, basically a blank check for many, many industries and people, where it's just, it uses the money from our labor as people, as individuals, to make sure the government's running. And it's basically handing that money. It's basically just like, here you go to different industries and different groups, to be able to carry out things that they need to carry, all in the name of just having more resources and more money. And I think that's just doesn't end up serving the people that it's meant to. So I don't know what that looks like, but that's my big thing, I think.
I think we can be in agreement on that.
Okay.
I actually have a very detailed set of ideas of I do. It's funny. I have too much driving time, honestly, to think about things. Yeah. But I have a whole detailed thing about money in government, and at least on the election portion of things, of how I would conceivably address that. Whether or not that idea is perfect or incorruptible would be a different question.
In the interest of time, though, I guess we would talk about just things that we would attack. Okay, so money in government, how that's working. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else?
The big thing for me is education, actually. Education, I think, is one of the most fundamental things. I don't even have a word for it. But it's one of the most fundamental things in terms of making sure that your populace is able to parse out what is happening. Right? And one thing that I have definitely noticed in the fact that I've, since, even while I was in school, doing my own research on certain things and getting different perspectives. And there's even arguments made by, organizations and activists like the BLM where it's education doesn't cover, certain aspects of our history and these perspectives. Yeah. In the way that it's taught, a lot of the problems that I see in fraying edges that I see of our society and even the way that our government is run is due to the fact that we do not have an education system, in my opinion, that is designed to empower an individual to be a competent member in that process. And so I think when you have that scenario, you're inevitably going to get these sort of corrupting influences because the people, the way that it was set up is people, the populace, the governed, are supposed to wield their consent in opposition, in most cases, to the government. That was the idea. And so when you weaken the people, the government has less force going against it. And so to me, one of the first and probably most deadly ways to strengthen a people is to make them educated. And not educated in the way that I want them or what this other group wants them. People understanding how to think first and foremost. How to think through things. Because it's not about knowing facts. Yeah. It's knowing how to interpret information. It's knowing how to come to a conclusion. It's knowing how to consider all sides. Because most of what I know you and I see, and we talk about it all the time with anything, whether it's conversations, political discussions about the pandemic or race relations or whatever, it's mostly people just repeating information. They're regurgitating things. They're not
Right.
processing.
Yes. Yeah.
And
They're not critically thinking about what's happening and maybe what their thoughts are, despite what is being laid out in front of them in terms of opinions. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that needs to be. I don't understand. I mean, I have my own theories, but if you are trying to make a more perfect union, I don't understand why you would not start with making critical processing, critical thinking, metacognition a key aspect of your curriculum from the beginning. Like,
Right.
not just
If your goal is to make a more perfect union, sure.
right.
I don't know if that's the goal anymore.
Not anymore,
by
no.
those who are up there in power right now in terms of government power, but yeah. No,
like-
that's a good thought. That's a good thought. I mean, being able to critically understand or critically think through a subject and to form an opinion on it despite what others are saying.
And to be encouraged to do so. I think that's another aspect.
Sure.
We need to be encouraged
encouraging
to do that.
others to think freely.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't have to agree. Omeed and I don't agree on everything. We agree on a lot of things.
No, I mean,
but,
we kind of displayed that earlier a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like, but I respect, like, the more perfect society is one, in my opinion, where despite the fact that you and I don't agree on something, I can respect and understand your processing of it. Right?
Right.
And you can respect and understand mine.
Yeah.
And we don't have to come to the same conclusion, but we both know that we're doing that in earnest with good intentions.
Right.
I'm not immediately assuming that because you disagree with me that you're an idiot or that you're part of this whatever.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
that's not me thinking, right?
You're reacting again, which is the whole theme of our last episode. Don't react. Think critically about what's going on.
And to me, like, that is, like, if you could do that effectively, not that it would completely eliminate it, but, like, even the corruption in government would be harder to accomplish.
I agree.
Like-
I agree. Yeah. If it gives you more of a stake in what's going on too, so you're more likely to combat that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like you are of the mind that the government or the apparatus for the United States, as it has been designed, is the more perfect union of all unions in the world.
I would say so. I would say so. For me personally, yes. I think that it is from and I can break down the metrics by which I assess that for other countries, but, like, for me personally, I believe that the foundation, whether or not it's being, like, I'm not speaking solely on the execution of it currently, because definitely we've just talked about things that I would change.
Yes.
But if I'm looking at that Constitution, the Preamble, the Federalist Papers, the Declaration of Independence, like, these ideas, these values, this structure has yielded something that I don't think would have been capable otherwise. And I think that it is, by a lot of metrics, by most metrics, better than anything that existed at the time. And I think that even now, when you're looking at other, like, for instance, Western countries that we point to and we say, well, they have this and this is better. And I'm like, they got that by purchasing certain aspects of what we've done. They weren't that way to begin with.
Right. Yes.
Right? And so, for me, I think that the foundation of it is more perfect. And do we need to do some housekeeping? Yes.
Yes. Because the potential of the system is great.
Yeah.
It's just not fully being utilized right now.
Correct.
And I think that's where I think we agree 100% that the system has potential.
Yes.
Has a lot more potential than any other system that we are aware of. So, okay.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, yeah,
Yeah.
I think we're good. We're not good, but we got something good that we can work with.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's the point.
It's worth working with. It's not something that you should throw away,
Which,
in my opinion.
right. Yeah. It's
And-
not worth tearing down to rebuild something else.
Right.
I think the system allows for an evolution.
Yeah.
That, radical or not, I think it allows for it.
But we've seen that. There's evidence of that in the history
Right.
of the nation. Like, there were slaves, and now there are not slaves. At least, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the documentary, The 13th Amendment, But the argument about the prison system being basically modern slavery.
I haven't seen it, but I know that I know a little bit about it.
So at least in that sense, there are no slaves.
Right.
There is some argument to be had. I'm definitely not pro private prisons. I think it's a
I think we're opening up a can of worms here. But
sure.
Yeah. But okay. We have the ability to use this system to make the changes that we see fit that need to be changed to make that system more and more and more perfect.
And I think what we need to make that the case is a better understanding of what our responsibilities as individuals are.
Right.
To ourselves, to each other.
Okay.
And if we have that more solidified in our culture, like I don't know if that's something that's going to come from the government per se, but like if we have
to come from within the nation,
right.
the heart of the nation, which is us, the people. Okay.
Yeah.
So from here on out, I guess people need to just figure out what their rights are. So you have a better understanding of as a citizen of this nation or someone who wants to become a citizen of this nation, what are your rights? What are your duties to the nation? And really develop a good understanding of what that is. I need to do it. I think you've done a lot of research into it. I have not done as much. I'm curious though. It's opened up my mind a little bit to, especially in regard to this pandemic. It's a very extreme example, but it's something we're dealing with, and I'm wrestling with my own thoughts on it. So I think this is a good conversation, and I think people should continue to, after this, to think and to find and research these ideas further. Do you have any places for people to go look to understand more where you're coming from? You talked about the Federalist Papers.
Yes. I mean, I think that is a very good place to start for one, because one, that's a lot of reading to get through.
Right.
But two, it's literally the people that drafted these ideas.
Sure.
Working
where they're
them
coming
out,
from.
Where they're coming from,
right.
understanding the purpose behind them.
Yeah.
And so that's a great place to start. There's a few I would look up there's a few constitutional scholars. There's there's actually one right now, and it's interesting. There's something that's more current. New York Times is doing a series. I think it's called 1619.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, and even though there are things that I would contest in that, it is an interesting perspective to take. It's something that if you're going into it critically, I think it is very useful because it is basically taking the exact same history and kind of being hypercritical from a particular perspective.
Right.
And I think that is something that should be done too, is like looking through the deliberations of the first American Congress similarly has all of these arguments that these men laid out. With these different incentives, different ideals, and like hashing this out and eventually coming to some semblance of a consensus.
Right.
Like for me, I think that starting there, but then also enacting that process within yourself is the only way to move forward. So like even how you choose news sources.
Yeah.
Listening to CNN and Fox News. And I know
I would listen to neither. They're just wrong. No, they'll give you basic things, but they'll give you perspectives more than anything.
Right. And like that's, in terms of being actually informed, I'd say do your own research. But like in terms of seeing how two sides argue a point.
Right.
And going into it that way. Right. And understanding that this, at its core, what makes this process beautiful is that it is a constant discussion. Yeah.
Yeah. And that power really comes from you. And you just have to understand that and take hold and use that as leverage.
Yeah.
You have power.
Yes.
And us as a group of people, I mean, we talked about this a little earlier. We're talking about how ants, they're just so lame.
We hate ants so
We hate
much.
ants, but they're so incredibly powerful as a unit, or as a team. Essentially, they're just really good at organizing, and they can conquer areas and by sheer numbers alone and through organization. And that's what we need. We need to kind of take a note from them and be like, we empower ourselves with that knowledge, empower ourselves with the understanding of what we have the right to do, and how we can leverage that to build and continue to build and evolve our union to make it even more perfect.
And I think, to what you're speaking to is it's like we need to be a union in our minds. Like, it's not just a union on paper. Like, we have to understand that whether or not somebody voted for Trump, whether or not somebody is wearing a mask or whatever, like, we approach these situations understanding that the goal should be for all of us to be a union, to work together to a greater end.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, 100%. And we're all in this together.
Whether we like it or not.
Whether we agree or not. But it's always coming from a place to be better for all people. Maybe not everyone on the individual level agrees with that, but that is what most people want at the end of the day, is to have a better system.
Yep.
And I think that's a good spot to kind of to end this podcast.
Yeah. So, of course, as always, we want to hear everybody's feedback on this, as many people as possible.
Yep.
You can think that I'm dumb or whatever. Like I want to hear what people... Like, I enjoy the fact that even our first episode, like, people are talking to me. And
the engagement of ideas, which is great. We love to support the engaging us on those ideas and expanding our perspectives through conversation. I know we mentioned this before. We'd love to have people on here. Or at this point, it's kind of not doable just because of the pandemic. But if this thing grows, which we intend to keep going with it, we'd like to have a space where we can actually have this podcast that's not in my basement and have it a space where we can invite someone on or whatever, and maybe have more specific conversations with other perspectives, not just us kind of going back and forth on what we think.
Yeah.
But since that can't happen right away, that can happen online in the DMs or comment section, whatever. I'd say let's go for it, and we'll end it there. But feel free to continue the conversation after this is done.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.